The morning sun cast long shadows across the training compound as Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison watched the new sniper candidates file onto the range. 23 of the military's best marksmen had come to compete for just 5 spots in the Navy SEALs elite precision shooting program. Jake had seen this drill hundreds of times before, but something felt different today. "Sir, we have one late arrival," Sergeant Major Rodriguez called out, pointing toward the parking lot where a dusty pickup truck had just pulled in. Jake squinted against the glare and watched as someone climbed out of the driver's seat. Even from a distance, he could tell this wasn't what he'd expected. The figure was smaller than the others, moving with a fluid grace that immediately caught his attention. As the person approached, Jake realized his assumption had been wrong in more ways than one. She was a woman. Staff Sergeant Elena Vasquez walked toward the group with her gear bag slung over her shoulder, completely unbothered by the stares she was receiving. At 5'6", she looked almost tiny next to the other candidates, most of whom towered over her by at least 6 inches. Her dark hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her uniform was crisp and perfectly pressed despite the long drive to the base. "You've got to be kidding me," muttered Corporal Williams, one of the Marine candidates. "They're letting anyone try out now?" Several other men chuckled, and Jake noticed Elena's jaw tighten slightly, though her expression remained neutral. She'd clearly heard the comment, but chose not to respond. "Gentlemen," Jake called out, his voice carrying across the range with unmistakable authority. "And lady, welcome to SEAL Sniper Selection. Over the next 5 days, you'll be tested in ways that will push you beyond your limits. Most of you won't make it. That's not an insult. It's just reality." He began pacing in front of the group, his eyes scanning each face. "This isn't about who can shoot the straightest line on a nice day at a comfortable range. This is about who can make the impossible shot when lives depend on it, when you're exhausted, when the weather is terrible, and when failure means your teammates don't go home." Elena stood at attention with the others, but Jake found his eyes drawn to her repeatedly. There was something about her presence that seemed different from the usual bravado and testosterone that filled these selections. She looked calm, almost serene, in a way that reminded him of someone else he'd once known. "First exercise," Jake announced. "Cold bore shot. 1 round. Unknown distance. No warm-up. Target is an 8-inch circle. You miss, you're done." The candidates began setting up their rifles along the firing line. Jake noticed that Elena's weapon was different from most of the others. While many of the men had brought the latest high-tech rifles with every possible modification, her gun looked almost old-fashioned. It was a Remington 700, probably 20 years old, with a simple scope and no fancy accessories. "Nice antique," Williams commented as he set up his own rifle, which was loaded with the latest equipment. "Did you borrow that from a museum?" Elena finally spoke, her voice quiet but clear. "It belonged to my instructor." "Your instructor?" Williams laughed. "What? Some old sergeant at basic training." Elena's response was so soft that Jake had to strain to hear it. "Something like that." The first shooter took his position. The target was barely visible at 800 yards, a small white circle that looked like a dot against the brown backdrop of the hill. The Marine fired, and after a moment, the spotter called out, "Miss, left edge." "Pack your gear," Jake said without emotion. "Transport leaves in 10 minutes." One by one, the candidates took their turns. Some hit the target, others missed by inches or feet. The pressure was building as the group got smaller. Jake noticed that Elena had positioned herself near the end of the line, watching each shooter with intense focus. "Nervous?" Williams asked her as his turn approached. "Maybe you should quit now and save yourself the embarrassment." Elena didn't respond, but Jake saw something flicker in her eyes. Not anger, exactly, but something deeper, a kind of focused intensity that he recognized from his own years in combat. Williams took his shot and hit the target dead center. "That's how it's done," he announced loudly, clearly directing his comment toward Elena. As the line shortened, Jake found himself increasingly curious about Elena's background. Her file had been surprisingly thin. Army sniper school graduate, top of her class, several deployments overseas, but no details about her specific assignments or accomplishments. Usually, the files for candidates at this level were thick with commendations and mission reports. Staff Sergeant Vasquez, Jake called when only 3 shooters remained. "You're up." Elena walked to the firing line with the same unhurried pace she'd maintained all day. She settled behind her rifle with movements that were both deliberate and natural, as if she'd performed this exact routine thousands of times before. Jake raised his binoculars to watch the target. Through his peripheral vision, he noticed that the other candidates had stopped their conversations to observe. Even Williams, who'd been making jokes all morning, had gone quiet. Elena's breathing slowed to the rhythm that all professional snipers learned. In for 4 counts, hold for 4, out for 4, hold for 4. Her body became perfectly still except for the gentle rise and fall of her back. The silence stretched out longer than usual. Most shooters took their shot within 30 seconds of settling into position, but Elena remained motionless for nearly 2 minutes. Jake was beginning to wonder if she was experiencing nerves when he heard the sharp crack of her rifle. Through his binoculars, Jake watched the target. At first, he couldn't see any change, and he assumed she'd missed entirely. Then he noticed something odd. There was no new hole visible in the white circle, but something was different about the existing holes from previous shooters. "Spotter report," Jake called out. Sergeant First Class Chun, who was manning the spotting scope, was quiet for a moment. Then, his voice came back with obvious confusion. "Sir, I need to check something." Chin's silence stretched on uncomfortably. Jake lowered his binoculars and looked at the spotter, who was adjusting his scope and checking it again. "What's the problem, Chun?" "Sir, I think she shot through one of the existing holes. The Williams hole is bigger now, but I can't tell if it's 1 hole or 2. A murmur went through the remaining candidates. Shooting through an existing hole at 800 yards was possible, but it would be an incredible stroke of luck. More likely, Elena had missed the target entirely, and Chin was seeing shadows or optical illusions. "That's impossible," Williams said flatly. "Nobody's that good." Jake felt a strange chill run down his spine. He'd only known one person who could consistently thread bullets through existing holes at that distance, and that person was supposed to be dead. "We need to check the target," Jake announced. "Everyone stays here. Chun, Rodriguez, with me." The 3 men climbed into a utility vehicle and drove out to the target area. As they got closer, Jake's feeling of unease grew stronger. When they reached the target stand, his suspicions were confirmed in a way that made his blood run cold. The target had 5 holes in it from the previous shooters who'd hit. Williams' hole was in the dead center of the 8-inch circle, a perfect bullseye. But when Jake examined it closely, he could see that it wasn't 1 hole anymore. Elena's bullet had passed through the exact center of Williams' shot, expanding the hole, but leaving unmistakable evidence that 2 bullets had passed through the same point. "Jesus Christ," Rodriguez whispered. "I've never seen anything like that." But Jake had seen it before. Years ago, in Afghanistan, he'd watched someone demonstrate the same impossible accuracy. The person who'd taught him that true precision wasn't about hitting the target. It was about hitting exactly where you intended to hit, even if that spot was the size of a dime at nearly half a mile. "Sir," Chin was looking at Jake with concern. "Are you all right?" Jake realized he'd been staring at the target for several minutes without speaking. His mind was racing, trying to process what he'd just witnessed. The person who'd shown him that shot was Marcus "Ghost" Riley, the most legendary sniper in SEAL history. Ghost had supposedly died in a mountain operation in Afghanistan 3 years ago. His body never recovered. "We head back," Jake said finally. "Don't mention what we found here until I figure out what's going on." The drive back to the firing line was silent, but Jake's mind was anything but quiet. Ghost had been more than just a legendary sniper. He'd been Jake's mentor, the person who'd taught him everything about precision shooting and battlefield awareness. If Elena had learned from Ghost, it meant Ghost might still be alive. But it also raised questions about who Elena really was and why she was here. When they returned to the group, Elena was sitting apart from the other candidates, cleaning her rifle with the same methodical precision she'd shown in her shooting. She looked up when Jake approached, and for just a moment, he saw something in her eyes that reminded him powerfully of Ghost, a depth of knowledge and experience that seemed far beyond her apparent age. "Congratulations, Staff Sergeant," Jake said carefully. "You hit the target." "Thank you, sir." Her response was simple and professional, but Jake caught something else in her tone. She knew he'd seen more than just a hit. She knew he'd recognized the signature of that shot. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Jake asked, keeping his voice casual despite the intensity of his curiosity. Elena's pause was brief, but Jake noticed it. "Practice, sir. Lots of practice. Must have been a good instructor. The best." This time, there was no mistaking the emotion in her voice. Pride, certainly, but also something that might have been grief. Jake nodded slowly. "We'll continue with the next phase tomorrow." Dismissed. As the candidates began to pack up their equipment, Jake watched Elena carefully. She moved with the same efficiency she'd shown all day, but now he was noticing details he'd missed before. The way she handled her rifle with perfect familiarity. The way she scanned the environment constantly without appearing to do so. The way she positioned herself so she could see all the exits and approaches. These weren't skills you learned in regular Army sniper school. These were the habits of someone who'd been trained by the very best, someone who'd learned from a master of fieldcraft and survival, someone who'd learned from Ghost. "Sir." Rodriguez appeared at Jake's elbow. "What do you want me to tell the other candidates about tomorrow's schedule?" "Standard progression," Jake replied absently. "But, Rodriguez, I want you to run a deeper background check on Vasquez. Everything you can find." "Yes, sir." "Should I be looking for something specific?" Jake watched Elena climb into her pickup truck, noting that she backed out of her parking space in a way that gave her multiple escape routes. "Look for connections to anyone named Riley." "Marcus Riley." Rodriguez's eyes widened slightly. He'd been in the teams long enough to know the Ghost's legend. "You think she knew him?" "I think," Jake said slowly, "that she might be the only person who can tell us what really happened to him." As Elena's truck disappeared down the road leading away from the base, Jake felt the weight of questions that needed answers. Tomorrow's training would reveal more about her abilities, but tonight he had research to do. If Elena Vasquez had been trained by Ghost, she was far more than just another sniper candidate. She might be the key to solving a mystery that had haunted the SEAL community for 3 years. More importantly, if Ghost was still alive, Jake needed to know. The man who'd saved his life more than once and taught him everything about being a warrior deserved better than being presumed dead. And if Elena was here for a reason beyond just making the team, Jake needed to understand what that reason was. The sun was setting over the Pacific as Jake walked back to his office, his mind already working through the implications of what he'd witnessed. Tomorrow would bring new tests, new challenges, and, hopefully, some answers. But one thing was certain: Staff Sergeant Elena Vasquez was not who she appeared to be, and her presence at this selection was about to change everything. The next morning arrived with typical California coastal fog, reducing visibility to less than 50 yards. Jake stood in the pre-dawn darkness, watching the candidates arrive for day 2 of selection. Most pulled up in rental cars or base transportation, but Elena's pickup appeared through the mist like a ghost itself, her headlights cutting through the gray morning. Rodriguez approached with a steaming cup of coffee and a file folder under his arm. "Got that background check you requested, sir?" "Interesting reading." Jake took the folder and scanned the contents under his flashlight. What he found only deepened the mystery. Elena Vasquez had enlisted in the Army 6 years ago, straight out of high school in a small town in Texas. Her initial training records were standard, but then there was a gap. For nearly 8 months, her file showed only that she'd been assigned to special training, with no details about location or instructors. "Look at the dates," Rodriguez said quietly. "That 8-month gap corresponds exactly with the time frame when Ghost was supposedly running off-the-books training for selected personnel." Jake's pulse quickened. The Ghost had indeed run unofficial training programs for hand-picked soldiers from all branches of the military, teaching advanced fieldcraft and marksmanship to people he believed had exceptional potential. The programs were so classified that most participants didn't even know who their instructor really was. After that gap, her performance ratings are off the charts, Rodriguez continued. Every shooting competition, first place. Every field exercise, highest scores. But here's the weird part. She's never requested transfer to any special operations units. Never applied for Ranger School, never tried for Special Forces. Just stayed in regular Army assignments. Until now, Jake murmured, studying Elena's service record. Question is, why now? Why show up here 3 years after Ghost's supposed death? Maybe she finally, decided to follow in his footsteps. Jake wasn't convinced. Ghost had never been someone who encouraged his students to seek glory or recognition. If anything, he'd taught them the value of staying in the shadows, of being effective without being noticed. For one of his students to suddenly appear at the most high-profile sniper selection in the military suggested something else was happening. "Sir." Sergeant Chen appeared out of the fog. "Candidates are formed up and ready for briefing." Jake closed the file and handed it back to Rodriguez. "Today's exercise stays between us until I understand what we're dealing with." The second day's challenge was designed to test the candidates' ability to function under stress and in adverse conditions. Each shooter would have to navigate a course through rough terrain, locate 3 hidden targets at unknown distances in the fog, and engage them successfully. The catch was that they only got 1 shot per target, and they had to complete the course in under 2 hours. "This isn't a shooting competition," Jake explained to the assembled group. "This is a simulation of real-world conditions where you might need to take precision shots after physical exertion, in poor visibility, with no chance for follow-up attempts." The candidates looked nervous as they contemplated the challenge. Even Williams, who'd been so confident the day before, was fidgeting with his equipment and checking his watch repeatedly. "You'll start at 5-minute intervals," Jake continued. "First man up is Martinez." One by one, the candidates disappeared into the fog-shrouded course. Jake monitored their progress through radio reports from observers positioned throughout the training area. Some candidates found all 3 targets, but missed their shots. Others got lost in the difficult terrain and ran out of time. A few managed to hit 1 or 2 targets before other problems eliminated them. By mid-morning, only 7 of the original 23 candidates remained. Williams had managed to hit 2 of his 3 targets, keeping him in the running, but clearly frustrated by his imperfect performance. "Vasquez, you're up," Jake announced when Elena's turn arrived. She'd spent the waiting time sitting quietly apart from the others, occasionally checking her equipment, but mostly just observing the fog patterns and wind direction. As she prepared to enter the course, Jake noticed she'd modified her rifle slightly, adding a small device to the barrel that he recognized as a simple sound suppressor. "Is that authorized?" Williams called out. "She's got equipment the rest of us don't have." Jake examined the suppressor. It was a basic commercial model, nothing exotic or high-tech. "Suppressors are authorized equipment," he ruled. "If you chose not to bring one, that's your decision." Elena checked her watch and started into the course at a steady jog that looked sustainable for the long haul. Jake followed her progress on his tactical map as observers reported her position. What surprised him was the route she chose. Instead of taking the most direct path to where the targets were likely positioned, she took a longer route that followed natural terrain features and would keep her concealed from multiple directions. "Sir, she's not heading toward any of the target areas," Chen observed. "She's moving parallel to the main ridge line instead of crossing it." Jake studied the map more carefully. Elena's route would take her to higher ground that overlooked all 3 potential target positions. It was a more difficult climb, but it would give her better visibility and clearer shots once the fog started to lift. "She's thinking tactically, not just trying to complete the exercise," Jake realized. "She's positioning herself for success instead of just rushing to find targets." For the next hour, Elena's progress was steady but deliberate. While other candidates had rushed through the course, she was taking time to study the terrain and wind patterns. Jake began to understand that she wasn't just looking for targets. She was learning the environment in a way that would give her every possible advantage. "Contact, Target 1. Came the radio report from Observer Post Alpha. "Clean hit, center mass." Jake checked his watch. Elena had been on the course for 73 minutes and had just taken her first shot. Most candidates had fired all their rounds within the first hour, either hitting or missing their targets early in the exercise. "Target 2 engaged," reported Observer Post Bravo 15 minutes later. Hit confirmed. Elena was now at 90 minutes with 2 hits and 1 target remaining. She had 30 minutes to find and engage the final target, but Jake was beginning to suspect that she'd already located it and was just waiting for optimal conditions. His suspicion proved correct. With exactly 10 minutes left on her time limit, Elena's third shot echoed across the training area. The report from Observer Post Charlie was immediate. "Target 3, center hit." Exercise complete. When Elena emerged from the fog 20 minutes later, she looked as composed as she had at the start of the day. Her uniform was damp from the mist, but not muddy or torn like most of the other candidates. Her breathing was steady, and she showed no signs of the exhaustion that had marked the other shooters. Time, 1 hour 57 minutes, Jake announced. 3 targets engaged, 3 hits confirmed. Williams stared at Elena with undisguised disbelief. How is that possible? The fog was so thick you couldn't see 50 yards. Elena was checking her rifle, making sure it was clear and safe before securing it in her case. She looked up at Williams with an expression that was perfectly neutral. You learn to work with the conditions instead of fighting them. What's that supposed to mean? Fog moves. Wind patterns change. If you're patient and observant, there are always opportunities. Jake found himself nodding unconsciously. That was exactly the kind of thinking Ghost had tried to teach. The understanding that environmental conditions weren't obstacles to overcome, but factors to be understood and used to your advantage. How did you know where the targets would be? Williams pressed. You took a completely different route from everyone else. Elena shouldered her rifle case and looked at Williams with what might have been amusement. I didn't know where they would be. I went where I could see the most area with the best concealment. But you found them all. Because I wasn't looking for targets. I was looking for places where targets might be positioned. Big difference. Jake felt another chill of recognition. That was pure Ghost philosophy. Don't look for what you expect to see. Look for what makes tactical sense. Understand the environment and the mission, and the targets will reveal themselves. As the day's exercise concluded, Jake realized that Elena wasn't just demonstrating exceptional shooting skills. She was showing a level of tactical thinking and fieldcraft that went far beyond normal military training. She was thinking like someone who'd been taught by a master of the art of war. That evening, Jake sat in his office studying Elena's performance reports from both days. Her shooting was flawless, but more importantly, her decision-making showed a maturity and understanding that usually took years of combat experience to develop. She wasn't just following procedures, she was adapting them to circumstances in real time. Rodriguez knocked on the door and entered with another file. Found something else interesting, sir. I dug deeper into that 8-month training period. What did you find? The training wasn't just marksmanship. Records show she also completed advanced courses in languages, cultural studies, and what the files call specialized reconnaissance techniques. That's usually code for deep cover intelligence work. Jake looked up from Elena's scores. Ghost wasn't just training her to be a sniper. He was training her to be an operator. There's more. After that training, she was assigned to a unit that doesn't officially exist. No records of their missions, no details about their operations. Just a designation, Task Force Shepherd. The name hit Jake like a physical blow. Task Force Shepherd was Ghost's personal project, a small unit of operators trained for the most sensitive and dangerous missions. Jake had always assumed it was just a rumor, something that existed more in legend than reality. Sir, are you okay? Jake was staring at the wall, his mind racing through the implications. If Elena had been part of Task Force Shepherd, she wasn't just Ghost's student, she was one of his hand-picked operators. Which meant her presence at this selection wasn't random or career-motivated. She was here for a specific reason, and Jake was beginning to suspect he knew what that reason might be. Rodriguez, I want you to arrange something for tomorrow. Instead of the standard Day 3 exercise, we're going to run a special scenario. What kind of scenario? Jake stood and walked to the window, looking out at the fog that was beginning to lift from the Pacific. The kind that will force Elena Vasquez to show us exactly who she really is and why she's here. Sir, are you sure that's wise? If she really is connected to Ghost, then she might be the only person who can give us answers about what happened to him. Jake interrupted. And if Ghost is still alive somewhere, he might need our help. Rodriguez nodded slowly. What do you need me to set up? A simulation of the mission where Ghost disappeared. Same terrain, same scenario, same impossible choices. If Elena was really trained by him, if she really knows what happened, she'll recognize it immediately. And if she doesn't? Jake turned back to Rodriguez with an expression that was equal parts determination and concern. Then, we'll know she's just an exceptionally gifted sniper who happened to cross paths with a legend. But if she does recognize it, sir, then We're about to learn secrets that people have died to protect. And we better be ready for whatever comes next. As Rodriguez left to make the arrangements, Jake remained at his window, watching the last of the fog clear from the mountains where tomorrow's exercise would take place. Somewhere in those peaks, 3 years ago, Ghost had vanished while attempting to extract a captured intelligence officer from enemy territory. The mission had been classified at the highest levels, and, officially, it had never happened. But, if Elena Vasquez was who Jake suspected she was, tomorrow would reveal whether Ghost's final mission had really been a failure, or whether it had been something else entirely. Something that might still be unfolding, with Elena's arrival being just the next phase of a plan that had been 3 years in the making. The sun was setting behind the mountains as Jake finally left his office, his mind already focused on the challenge ahead. Tomorrow would test more than just Elena's abilities. It would test everything Jake thought he knew about his mentor, about the mission that had supposedly claimed Ghost's life, and about the woman who might be the key to understanding the truth. One way or another, tomorrow would bring answers. Jake just hoped he was ready for what those answers might reveal. Dawn broke clear over the mountains as Jake briefed the remaining 7 candidates on Day 3's challenge. He'd spent most of the night working with Rodriguez to recreate the exact scenario that had claimed Ghost's life 3 years earlier. Every detail had been carefully planned to match the original mission parameters. Today's exercise simulates a real-world situation, Jake explained to the assembled group. You're tasked with providing overwatch for an extraction mission in hostile territory. The principal is a high-value intelligence asset who's been compromised and needs immediate evacuation. Elena stood at attention with the others, but Jake noticed her posture had subtly changed from the previous days. She was more alert, more focused, as if something about the briefing had triggered her attention. The complication, Jake continued, is that enemy forces have established multiple checkpoints along all the logical escape routes. Your job is to eliminate specific targets that will create a corridor for the extraction team to reach the principal. Williams raised his hand. How many targets, sir? 3 confirmed enemy positions, each one covering a different potential route. You'll need to engage them in a specific sequence within a narrow time window to avoid alerting the larger enemy force in the area. Jake watched Elena's face carefully as he described the scenario. Her expression remained neutral, but he caught a slight tightening around her eyes that suggested recognition. Each of you will take a different position on the ridgeline, Jake explained, pointing to a tactical map. You'll have radio communication with the extraction team, but once the mission begins, you'll need to make critical decisions independently based on changing conditions. The candidates began studying their assigned positions on the map. Elena's assignment put her at the highest and most isolated position on the ridge, with the longest and most difficult shots. It was exactly where Ghost had been positioned during the original mission. Questions? Jake asked. Elena spoke for the first time that morning. Rules of engagement, sir? The question seemed routine, but Jake heard something else in her tone. She was testing him, seeing if he would give her the same impossible ROE that had doomed the original mission. Minimize collateral damage, Jake replied, using the exact phrase from Ghost's original orders. Civilian presence is possible in the area. Positive identification required before engagement. Elena's reaction was barely visible, just a slight nod that could have been acknowledgement of the orders. But Jake knew she'd recognize the language. These were the same restrictions that had forced Ghost to attempt impossible shots rather than take simpler but more dangerous approaches. Equipment check in 30 minutes, Jake announced. First position briefings at 0800 hours. As the candidates dispersed to prepare their gear, Elena remained behind, studying the map with unusual intensity. Jake approached her, keeping his voice casual. Something wrong with your position, Staff Sergeant? Elena looked up from the map, and, for just a moment, Jake saw something in her eyes that looked like pain. No, sir. Just familiarizing myself with the terrain. It's challenging ground. Long shots, difficult angles, limited escape routes if things go wrong. Yes, sir. Whoever designed this scenario understood the tactical complexities. Jake felt his pulse quicken. What makes you say that? Elena traced her finger along the ridgeline on the map, following the exact route Ghost had taken 3 years earlier. The positioning forces the sniper to make multiple high-difficulty shots under time pressure, while maintaining concealment from a numerically superior enemy force. It's tactically sound, but operationally very dangerous. Dangerous how? If the sniper misses any of the targets or takes too long, the entire extraction team is compromised. The success of the mission and the lives of multiple personnel depend completely on one person's ability to execute perfectly under extreme pressure. Jake stared at Elena, realizing she wasn't just analyzing the exercise, she was describing exactly what had happened to Ghost. The original mission had placed impossible demands on one person, and when complications arose, there had been no backup plan and no way out. And if complications arise? Jake asked quietly. Elena's answer came without hesitation, as if she'd thought about this exact scenario many times before. The sniper becomes expendable. Mission success takes priority over individual survival. The words hung in the air between them like an accusation. Jake knew that Elena wasn't just talking about the exercise. She was describing the mentality that had sent Ghost on a mission with no realistic chance of success and no viable extraction plan. That's a harsh assessment, Jake said carefully. Elena folded the map and secured it in her gear bag. It's a realistic assessment, sir. Sometimes the mission requires sacrifices. An hour later, the candidates were in position across the mountainous terrain. Jake monitored their progress from the command post, watching through binoculars as they established their shooting positions and prepared for the simulated mission to begin. Elena had reached her assigned location faster than expected, despite it being the most difficult approach. Through his scope, Jake could see that she'd positioned herself in almost exactly the same spot Ghost had chosen 3 years earlier. The similarities were too precise to be coincidental. All positions, radio check, Jake announced over the communications net. One by one, the candidates reported in. Elena's call sign was Shepherd 7, a designation Jake had chosen specifically to see her reaction. In the original mission, Ghost had used the call sign Shepherd 6. Shepherd 7, acknowledge, Jake called. Elena's response came back immediately, but Jake caught something in her voice that hadn't been there before. Shepherd 7, position established and ready. Copy, Shepherd 7. Stand by for mission commencement. Jake initiated the scenario with the same timing and conditions as the original mission. The extraction team began their approach toward the principal, while simulated enemy forces maintained their positions at the checkpoints. Elena and the other snipers had 20 minutes to identify and eliminate their targets, creating a safe corridor for the extraction. Through his monitoring equipment, Jake watched as the other candidates began engaging their assigned targets. Some hit, others missed, but all of them followed standard procedures and took their shots when opportunities presented themselves. Elena was different. Even as target opportunities became available, she held her fire, continuing to observe and analyze the situation. Jake began to worry that she was experiencing pressure or uncertainty when her voice came over the radio. Control, Shepherd 7. Request permission to adjust target priorities. Jake's blood ran cold. Those were almost exactly the words Ghost had used in his final transmission 3 years earlier. Explain your request, Shepherd 7. Current target sequence will alert enemy reserve forces before extraction team reaches the principal. Recommend alternative engagement plan. Jake found himself facing the same decision the original mission commander had confronted. Elena was asking to deviate from the plan, just as Ghost had. In the original mission, that request had been denied, forcing Ghost to attempt increasingly desperate measures to complete the mission as originally designed. Negative, Shepherd 7. Maintain assigned targets and timeline. Elena's response came after a long pause. Understood, Control. Engaging assigned targets. But instead of following the prescribed sequence, Elena did something that made Jake's heart stop. She began taking the same alternative shots Ghost had attempted, engaging targets in an order that would have worked if he'd been allowed to use it from the beginning. Her first shot eliminated a target that wasn't even on the original list, but which Jake now realized had been the key tactical problem all along. With that position cleared, the extraction route became viable in ways the original planners hadn't considered. Shepherd 7, you're engaging unauthorized targets, Jake called over the radio. Elena's voice came back calm and professional. Control, adjusting for tactical realities. Original plan is compromised. Jake watched through his binoculars as Elena continued to execute what looked like a perfect alternative strategy. Each shot she took solved a problem the original mission planners had missed or ignored. She wasn't following orders. She was demonstrating how the mission should have been conducted from the beginning. All positions cease fire, Jake commanded. Exercise terminated. As the candidates began to pack up their equipment, Jake realized that Elena had just shown him exactly what Ghost had been trying to accomplish in his final mission. The plan Ghost had been denied permission to execute was the plan Elena had just demonstrated successfully. When Elena returned to the command post an hour later, Jake was waiting for her with Rodriguez and the complete file on Ghost's final mission. "We need to talk, Staff Sergeant," Jake said quietly. Privately, Elena looked at the file folder in Jake's hands, and her carefully maintained composure finally cracked slightly. "Yes, sir. I think we do." Jake led her to a secure briefing room and closed the door. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Jake placed the file on the table between them. "Marcus Riley was my mentor," he said simply. "He taught me everything I know about precision shooting and tactical thinking. When he disappeared 3 years ago, I was told he was dead." Elena stared at the file, but didn't reach for it. "What makes you think he isn't?" "Because everything you've done in the last 3 days has been exactly what he would have done. You think like him, you shoot like him, and today you demonstrated knowledge of a classified mission that officially never happened." Elena was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "He saved my life. More than once. In Afghanistan. In Afghanistan. In Yemen. In places that don't officially exist where we did things that officially never happened." Elena looked up at Jake with eyes that held years of secrets. "He was the best teacher I ever had, and the finest man I ever knew." Jake leaned forward. "Elena, I need you to tell me the truth. Is Marcus Riley alive?" Elena's answer came without hesitation, but with an emotion that she'd been hiding for days. "I don't know. That's why I'm here." "What do you mean?" Elena reached into her pocket and pulled out a small device that Jake recognized as an encrypted satellite communicator. 3 weeks ago, this activated for the first time since his disappearance. One message, no identification, just coordinates and a time. Jake stared at the device. "The coordinates?" "A location in the mountains about 50 miles from here. The time is tomorrow at 1800 hours. And you think it's from Ghost?" Elena's voice was steady, but Jake could see the hope and fear warring in her expression. The message used an authentication code that only he knew. Either Marcus is alive and needs help, or someone else has information about what really happened to him. Jake sat back in his chair, trying to process what Elena had just told him. Why come here for selection? Why not just go to the coordinates? Because if it is Marcus, and if he's been hiding for 3 years, there's a reason. He might be compromised, or in danger, or part of something bigger than I can handle alone. Elena met Jake's eyes directly. "He always talked about you. Said you were the one person he trusted completely, the one person who would understand if something ever went wrong." Jake felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. If Ghost was alive, if he needed help, then Jake owed him everything. But if this was a trap or a deception, he could be walking into something that would destroy everything Ghost had worked for. "What do you need from me?" Jake asked. Elena's answer was simple but loaded with implications. "Help me find out the truth. And if Marcus is alive, help me bring him home." Jake looked at the woman sitting across from him, realizing that she represented his best and possibly only chance to learn what had really happened to his mentor. Tomorrow's meeting could provide answers to questions that had haunted him for 3 years. "All right," he said finally. "But we do this carefully, and we do it right. If Ghost is out there, we're going to find him. And if someone's using his memory to lay a trap, they're going to regret it." Elena nodded, and for the first time since she'd arrived, Jake saw her smile. It was an expression that spoke of relief, determination, and hope. Tomorrow would bring answers, one way or another. Jake just hoped they were prepared for whatever truth they might discover in those mountains. The next morning arrived with an unexpected complication that changed everything. Jake was in his office preparing for the journey to Elena's coordinates when Rodriguez burst through the door with an urgent expression. "Sir, we have a problem. Major problem." Jake looked up from the tactical maps he'd been studying. What now? Intelligence intercept from NSA. There's chatter about a major terrorist operation planned for tonight. Target appears to be the naval base at San Diego. Jake's blood ran cold. San Diego was less than 200 miles south, home to the largest concentration of naval assets on the West Coast. What kind of operation? Rodriguez handed Jake a classified briefing folder. Best guess is a coordinated attack on multiple ships in port, possibly involving stolen military explosives. The intelligence is sketchy, but there's mention of someone called the Ghost being involved. Jake stared at the folder, his mind racing. The Ghost? Are they referring to Marcus? That's what we need to find out. The intercept suggests that whoever this Ghost is, he's planning to provide precision fire support for the attack. Long-range shooting to take out security personnel and create chaos during the main assault. Jake felt sick. If Marcus was alive and involved in a terrorist operation, it would destroy everything Jake believed about his mentor. But if someone else was using Ghost's reputation and methods, it meant Marcus might be in even greater danger than they'd suspected. Sir, Rodriguez was watching Jake carefully. What are your orders? Jake made a decision that felt like stepping off a cliff. We stick with the plan. Elena and I go to those coordinates tonight. But we go prepared for anything. Sir, if Ghost is really involved in this attack, then we need to know the truth more than ever, Jake interrupted. Either Marcus is alive and needs our help, or someone's using his identity and methods for terrorism. Either way, tonight's meeting might be our only chance to get answers. Rodriguez nodded reluctantly. What do you want me to do about the San Diego threat? Alert the base security, but keep it quiet. If this is connected to our situation, we don't want to spook anyone into changing their plans. And Rodriguez? If Elena and I don't report back by 2,100 hours, assume the worst and contact higher command. An hour later, Jake and Elena were driving through the mountains toward the coordinates she'd received. Elena had changed out of her military uniform into civilian hiking gear, but Jake noticed she'd brought her rifle and enough ammunition for a sustained firefight. You really think this could be a trap? Elena asked as they navigated the winding mountain roads. I think we need to be ready for anything, Jake replied. If Marcus is alive, he's been hiding for 3 years for a reason. If someone else is using his identity, they're playing a very dangerous game. Elena was quiet for several miles, staring out at the rugged terrain. Finally, she spoke again. There's something I haven't told you about that final mission in Afghanistan. Jake's hands tightened on the steering wheel. What? The intelligence officer we were supposed to extract? He wasn't just any asset. He was a deep-cover operative who'd been gathering information about terrorist financing networks. Marcus discovered that the mission was compromised from the beginning. Someone on our side had leaked the details to the enemy. Jake felt pieces of a puzzle beginning to fall into place. So the mission was a trap? Marcus figured it out too late to abort, but in time to save some lives. He chose to sacrifice himself to ensure the intelligence officer could escape with critical information about terrorist funding sources. But his body was never found. Elena nodded grimly. Because he never died. At least, not the way the reports claimed. Marcus stayed behind to hold off the enemy forces while the rest of us escaped. The last time I saw him, he was alive and fighting. Jake pulled the vehicle over to the side of the road and turned to face Elena directly. Why didn't you report this? Why let everyone believe he was dead? Elena's answer came with obvious pain. Because Marcus ordered me not to. He said the mission had been compromised at the highest levels, and that reporting his survival would only put him and others in more danger. He told me to let them think he was dead until he could figure out who the traitor was. And you've heard nothing from him in 3 years? Nothing until that message 3 weeks ago. Elena pulled out the satellite communicator and showed Jake the screen. But look at the date and timestamps. This device has been receiving encrypted location updates for months, maybe longer. I just never noticed because they were hidden in the background data. Jake examined the device more carefully. Someone's been tracking you. Or protecting me. All the location updates correspond to places I've been stationed or deployed. It's like someone's been keeping watch over me from a distance. Jake started the engine again and continued driving toward their destination. If Marcus has been monitoring your movements for years, then Your selection for this program wasn't coincidental. I don't think it was coincidental at all. I think Marcus arranged for me to be here, at this time, for this specific reason. But what reason? What does he need us for? Elena's answer was interrupted by the sound of Jake's satellite phone ringing. He answered to find Rodriguez on the other end, speaking in urgent tones. Sir, the San Diego situation just escalated. Base security found evidence of surveillance on multiple naval vessels, and there are reports of unidentified personnel in the area. But here's the weird part. Whoever's doing the surveillance is also providing anonymous tips to security about potential vulnerabilities. Jake exchanged glances with Elena. Someone's playing both sides? It gets stranger. The anonymous tips are being delivered through channels that suggest extensive knowledge of military procedures and security protocols. This isn't some amateur operation. Jake felt understanding beginning to dawn. Rodriguez, I want you to check something for me. Cross-reference the timing of those anonymous security tips with any known sightings or activities around San Diego over the past few months. What am I looking for, sir? Evidence that someone's been conducting their own counter-surveillance operation. Someone who knows enough about military security to spot real threats, but who's working outside official channels. While Rodriguez worked on that research, Jake and Elena continued toward their meeting point. The coordinates led them to an abandoned fire lookout tower on a remote mountain peak, accessible only by a steep hiking trail that would take them several hours to complete. This is exactly the kind of place Marcus would choose, Elena observed as they began the climb. Excellent visibility, multiple escape routes, and defensible if necessary. As they hiked, Elena shared more details about her training with Ghost and the missions they'd conducted together. Jake began to understand that Marcus hadn't just been training individual soldiers. He'd been building a network of operators who could function independently when official channels became compromised. Task Force Shepherd wasn't just a military unit, Elena explained. It was Marcus's insurance policy. People he'd trained and trusted, positioned throughout the military and intelligence communities, ready to act if something went wrong with official operations. How many people? I only knew a few others directly, but Marcus hinted that there were dozens of us, all selected for specific skills, and all trained to think independently rather than just follow orders. Jake was beginning to realize that Ghost's supposed death might have been the beginning of a much larger operation rather than the end of his military career. If Marcus had been building a shadow network of trusted operators, his disappearance could have been a strategic withdrawal rather than a mission failure. As the sun began to set, they reached the fire lookout tower. The structure was clearly abandoned but in good repair, suggesting recent maintenance. Elena checked the satellite communicator and confirmed they were at the correct coordinates. Now we wait, she said, setting up a concealed observation position with a clear view of the surrounding area. Jake established his own position about 50 yards away, providing overlapping fields of fire while maintaining radio contact with Elena. As darkness fell, both of them scanned the area for any sign of movement or activity. At exactly 1800 hours, Elena's communicator activated with a new message. This time, instead of coordinates, it contained detailed instructions for a secure radio frequency and authentication codes. Elena, are you there? The voice that came over the radio made Jake's heart stop. It was older, more weathered than he remembered, but unmistakably Marcus Riley. Marcus! Elena's voice was barely controlled emotion. Is it really you? It's me, kid. And, Jake, I know you're listening. Thanks for looking after my best student. Jake keyed his radio with hands that were trembling slightly. Marcus, what the hell is going on? We thought you were dead. Ghost's laugh came over the radio, carrying a mixture of relief and exhaustion. Death seemed like the safest option at the time. But I've been busy these past 3 years, and I need your help with something important. The San Diego situation? You've been paying attention. Good. What did you conclude about the intelligence reports? Jake thought carefully before answering. Someone with extensive military knowledge has been conducting unauthorized surveillance on potential terrorist targets, while simultaneously providing security warnings through unofficial channels. Correct. That someone is me, with help from other Shepherd assets. We've been tracking a terrorist cell that's planning something big, but We can't move through official channels because their operation is being protected by someone in our own government. Elena broke in. Protected how? The cell leader is a former military officer who's been recruited by foreign intelligence services. He has contacts in the Pentagon and CIA who've been feeding him information about counterterrorism operations. Every time we try to move against him through normal channels, he gets advance warning. Jake felt the pieces finally falling into place. So you've been working outside the system for 3 years, building evidence, tracking their network, and preparing for the moment when we could act decisively without interference from compromised officials. And that moment is tonight? That moment is tonight. The cell is planning to attack the San Diego Naval Base using intelligence provided by their government contacts. But we've been feeding them false information for weeks, setting them up for a trap that will expose the traitors and neutralize the threat. Elena's voice carried new understanding. You need us because you can't trust official channels. I need you because this has to be done right, with minimal casualties and maximum intelligence value. The operation tonight will either destroy a major terrorist network or prove that our own government has been compromised at the highest levels. Jake made his decision. What do you need us to do? Ghost's answer would change everything they thought they knew about duty, loyalty, and the price of protecting their country from enemies both foreign and domestic. I need you to help me save lives and catch traitors, even if it means operating outside the law. The question is, do you trust me enough to follow where this leads? Jake looked across the darkness toward Elena's position, knowing that their answer would determine not just the success of tonight's operation, but the future of everything Ghost had been working toward for the past 3 years. The choice was simple, even if the consequences would be anything but. Jake's answer came without hesitation. Marcus, you saved my life more times than I can count. If you say there are traitors who need to be stopped, then we stop them. Elena's voice joined his over the radio. I've been waiting 3 years for this chance. Tell us what we need to do. Ghost's relief was audible in his transmission. Good. But I need you to understand what you're agreeing to. Tonight's operation will put us in direct conflict with official military and intelligence personnel. Some of them are traitors, but others are just following orders from compromised superiors. Jake felt the weight of that reality. We'll be operating against our own people. Against people wearing our uniforms, yes. But not against people who share our values or our oath to protect this country. Ghost transmitted detailed coordinates and timing information. The terrorist cell believes they're attacking the naval base with inside support. What they don't know is that we've identified all their government contacts and have been feeding them false information for weeks. Elena studied the coordinates on her GPS. This puts them in a perfect kill zone. Exactly. But here's the complication. Their government contacts are planning to eliminate the terrorists after the attack to cover their own involvement. We need to capture key personnel alive to prove the conspiracy. Jake understood the tactical challenge immediately. You need precision shots to disable rather than kill, while the targets are expecting to be betrayed and will be ready for a fight. Right? And we need to do it while official response teams are converging on the area, without getting ourselves killed by our own people who won't know we're the good guys. Ghost transmitted updated intelligence reports showing the current positions of all known participants in the night's events. The terrorist cell was moving toward the naval base along multiple routes, while their government contacts were positioning themselves to observe and then eliminate the attackers. Elena, I need you to take overwatch position here. Ghost indicated a location on Jake's tactical display. You'll have clear shots at 3 of the government contacts, but you'll need to disable them without killing them. Non-lethal precision shots at unknown distances in darkness against prepared targets, Elena summarized. Understood. Jake, you're with me on the primary intercept. We'll be engaging the terrorist cell directly while Elena keeps the traitors from escaping or interfering. Jake checked his equipment one final time. What about official response? Military police, FBI, local law enforcement. They'll arrive exactly when we want them to. I've arranged for anonymous tips to be delivered at specific times, bringing them to locations where they'll find evidence of the conspiracy along with captured participants. As they prepared to move out, Ghost's voice carried a warning that chilled Jake to the bone. There's one more thing you need to know. The terrorist cell leader isn't just a former military officer. He's someone we both know personally. Elena's voice was tense. Who? Colonel David Sterling, my former commanding officer and Jake's former instructor at sniper school. Jake felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. Sterling had been a legend in the special operations community, a man whose tactical brilliance and leadership had inspired a generation of warriors. The idea that he could be involved in terrorism seemed impossible. That's impossible, Jake said. Sterling was awarded the Medal of Honor. He's a patriot. Ghost's response was heavy with sadness. He was a patriot. But, somewhere along the way, he became convinced that our government was betraying the country he'd sworn to protect. Foreign intelligence services recruited him by convincing him he could do more good working against a corrupt system than within it. Elena's voice cut through the shock. How long have you known? I've suspected for 2 years, but I only got confirmation 6 months ago. Sterling's been using his reputation and contacts to facilitate terrorist operations that he believes will expose government corruption and force positive change. Jake struggled to process this information. He thinks he's saving the country by helping terrorists attack it? He's been convinced that small-scale attacks will prevent larger-scale destruction by forcing reform of intelligence and military leadership. Classic manipulation technique. Convince the target that betrayal is actually patriotism. As they moved toward their respective positions, Ghost provided additional details about Sterling's recruitment and the network of terrorist cells he'd been supporting. The San Diego operation was designed to be Sterling's masterpiece, an attack that would expose naval security vulnerabilities while providing him with intelligence that he could use to justify future operations. The plan tonight is to capture Sterling alive along with evidence of his foreign contacts, Ghost explained. But he's not going to surrender easily. He believes he's fighting for American values against American corruption. Elena reached her overwatch position first, establishing concealment among rocks that provided excellent fields of fire toward the positions where the government contacts were waiting. Through her scope, she could see 3 figures positioned to observe the planned attack. Shepard 7 in position, she reported. I have eyes on all 3 contacts. Waiting for your signal. Jake and Ghost moved together toward the intercept point where they would confront Sterling and his terrorist cell. As they approached, Jake found himself hoping there might be some mistake, some explanation that would prove Sterling's innocence. That hope died when they reached their observation point, and Jake saw Sterling through his binoculars. The man who'd once been his instructor was clearly directing the terrorist operation, pointing out target locations and coordinating timing with cell members. I see 6 terrorists plus Sterling, Jake reported quietly. They're armed with military-grade weapons and what looks like demolition charges. Ghost's voice was steady, but Jake could hear the emotion underneath. Sterling taught most of these techniques to the terrorists. He's essentially created a mirror image of our own special operations capabilities. As the terrorist cell began their final approach toward the naval base, Jake realized that stopping them would require fighting against tactics and strategies that Sterling himself had developed. They would be facing an enemy who knew exactly how they thought and how they would respond. All positions, execute on my mark, Ghost commanded. Elena's first shot was perfect, hitting the lead government contact in the shoulder and spinning him around without causing fatal damage. Her second shot, fired less than 3 seconds later, caught the second contact in the leg, dropping him immediately. The third contact realized what was happening and tried to escape, but Elena's final shot caught him in the hip, ending his flight without killing him. 3 contacts disabled and down, Elena reported. No fatalities. Simultaneously, Jake and Ghost engaged the terrorist cell from 2 directions. Their attack was perfectly coordinated, using suppressed weapons to maintain the element of surprise while systematically neutralizing targets. But Sterling was every bit the tactical genius his reputation suggested. Instead of panicking when the attack began, he immediately recognized the precision and coordination of his attackers. Ghost, Sterling's voice carried across the night air. I know you're out there. Let's finish what we started in Afghanistan. Jake realized that Sterling knew about Ghost's survival and had been preparing for this confrontation. The terrorist attack might have been secondary to drawing Ghost into the open. David, it's over, Ghost called back. Surrender now, and we can sort this out. Sterling's laugh was bitter and angry. Sort this out. You disappeared for 3 years while I tried to save this country from its own corruption. Where were you when we needed real leadership? The conversation revealed the depth of Sterling's delusion. He genuinely believed that his terrorist activities were patriotic acts designed to reform American military and intelligence leadership. The people you're working with aren't interested in reform, Ghost replied. They're using you to weaken American security so they can exploit the vulnerabilities you create. You're wrong, Marcus. My foreign contacts have shown me evidence of corruption that goes all the way to the top. The only way to fix the system is to tear it down and rebuild it. Jake watched through his scope as Sterling positioned his remaining terrorists for a final assault. The man was preparing to fight to the death rather than surrender, convinced that his cause was righteous. Elena, can you get a clean shot to disable Sterling without killing him? Ghost asked over the radio. Elena's response was immediate. Negative. Too much cover, and he's moving too erratically. I'd have to risk a fatal shot. Jake made a decision that felt like stepping into destiny. I'll take the shot. I know how Sterling thinks and how he moves. Jake, he was your instructor. He knows how you think too. Maybe. But he taught me to be predictable. You taught me to adapt. Jake moved to a position that would give him a clear angle on Sterling's location. As he settled behind his rifle, he thought about all the lessons Sterling had taught him about precision shooting and tactical thinking. Then, he thought about everything Ghost had taught him about thinking beyond the obvious, about finding solutions that no one else would consider. Sterling appeared in Jake's scope, moving with the fluid precision of a master warrior. For a moment, Jake hesitated, remembering the man who'd inspired him to become a sniper. Then, Sterling raised his weapon toward Ghost's position, and Jake's hesitation vanished. The shot was the most difficult of Jake's career, a moving target at distance, requiring perfect timing and placement to disable rather than kill. But it was also the most important shot he'd ever taken. Sterling dropped his weapon and fell to his knees, clutching his wounded shoulder. The terrorist operation was over. As military police and FBI agents arrived at precisely the times Ghost had arranged, they found a wealth of evidence documenting the conspiracy between Sterling and his foreign contacts. The captured government personnel provided additional intelligence about other compromised officials and ongoing operations. It's finished, Ghost said as he emerged from concealment to join Jake and Elena. The network is broken, the traitors are exposed, and the country is safer. Jake looked at his mentor, seeing new lines on his face and gray in his hair that spoke of 3 years of difficult and dangerous work. What happens now? Ghost smiled for the first time that Jake could remember. Now we go back to being soldiers instead of shadows. Elena gets her place in the SEAL sniper program. You continue training the next generation, and I finally get to come home. Elena's question was simple but loaded with meaning. Was it worth it? 3 years of living like a ghost. Ghost looked out over the lights of San Diego, where thousands of sailors would sleep safely that night because of what they'd accomplished. Ask me again in 10 years, when you're training the next group of warriors who'll have to choose between following orders and doing what's right. As they walked back toward their extraction point, Jake realized that tonight had been about more than stopping terrorists or catching traitors. It had been about proving that honor and duty sometimes required operating outside official channels, that true patriots sometimes had to become ghosts to protect what they loved. Elena Vasquez had come to SEAL selection looking for answers about her mentor's disappearance. Instead, she'd found her place in a legacy that would continue long after all of them were gone. A legacy of warriors who would always choose what's right over what's easy, even when the cost was everything they held dear. The ghost had finally come home, and the next generation of guardians was ready to take his place in the shadows.